The journey for me from college has been remarkable. And I love sharing this story because when I graduated, I grew up in Illinois, so I'm a small town, 6,000 people hometown. And where God has taken me in this journey to where he's got me now is nothing short of miraculous. My first job was in Florida. I went from Florida then to LA. I was in LA for about 8 years, but when I was in California, really there were two places that I started spending my time. I started spending my time on the basketball court. I was the one white guy that was in this couple of parks where I would play all the time, and I could tell you story after story after story where a fight would break out, guns were pulled, something was crazy, and I'm like, well, if they don't know who to shoot, I'm not the only guy, that's sticking out, so I'm out of there. And through that moment, but then I started spending a lot of time in the barber shops. I'm telling you, like the growth and experience of being in LA and being on the basketball courts and the barber shops, and we built this community center, started running midnight basketball leagues, started running after school programs, and I love what is accomplished on Sunday, but I'm a fanatic for mobilizing people to be actively engaged Monday through Saturday. And so what I started seeing in LA and reaching these gang members and being in the streets and in the basketball courts and the barber shops was nothing short of miraculous. Gang members come to Christ. We built a gym and we'd have over 100 guys every Thursday and Sunday come play. And I'm the only white guy in the building, and we would play, but they would sit and they would hear the gospel first, and then we'd hit the court. And just like God work in incredible ways, and then my wife and I really felt in 2006 a call to Denver. And it's one of those moments that you ever have a stirring before, but you're not really sure what it looks like or how you're going to get there. And sometimes when people ask you those great questions, you're like, I don't know, it's just God. Right? And they don't understand that because your answer doesn't make sense to them, but you just know that something deep within you. And so we had opportunities to do some other things that on paper made great sense. But when it came to the decision to go to Denver, nothing made sense. We told our church in June. We told our church in July. My oldest son, who's now 19, he was 2, so we had a 2-year-old. We had a baby in August. We sold our house in September. We left in October. So we went through this transition of we knew where we were supposed to go. And people would ask us questions about, do you have a job? Is there income, insurance? Where are you going to live? Great questions. And the answer was like, nope, no. We didn't have answers to any of those. We just knew we were supposed to go. And so I could tell people on how to not start a ministry, plant a church, or start something new except radical faith. And so when we said yes, we packed up our 2-year-old, our 2-month-old, and we hit the road. And I'm calling my friends that are pastors and church leaders. I'm like, hey, we're going to need your financial support. We're going to Denver. We're going to start this ministry. They would ask what the ministry ultimately was going to look like. I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to make it up when I get there. I just know I'm supposed to be in the city. And they would ask, like, this is like October. And they're like, hey, we'll meet in January. We'll let you know what our missions budget looks like. I'm like, I don't have a salary or insurance come November. So I don't have 4 months. I have 4 weeks. And we load up and we get out there. And it's some of the craziest moments ever in our life in this journey. We were shortly there, and I'm trying to pick up part-time jobs, get ourselves a place to live. We're living in our in-laws' basement with a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old in one room, figuring this thing out. And my first snow, I'm driving. And granted, I grew up in Illinois, but it's been a long time. I've been in Florida and California. So now I'm driving, and my wife had a little bit of a newer car that I had, this old pickup truck that barely made it. So I'm driving her car, it's snowing, and I look down to try to figure out how to, I'm the moron that couldn't figure out how to shut the Bluetooth off. So I'm like trying to figure out where, and I look up and a big truck had stopped in front of me. And so about 45 miles an hour, I just plow into the back of this truck, totaled my wife's car. That truck is fine, but if you've ever been in an accident before, man, your adrenaline's just cranking. And so I get out and I've got glass on my face, I'm bleeding, broken fingers, I'm a mess. The EMT gets there, but all I can think of is I don't have health insurance. And so they're trying to get me in the ambulance, take me to the hospital. I'm like, no, just like stop the bleeding, do what you got to do, but I can only think of how expensive that ride is in an ambulance, and I don't need to go to an ER, so I just do what you got to do, and I'm fine. Like, sir, you got to come with us. I'm like, nope, you can't. And so they're fine, like, you're an idiot, we'll do this, and they leave me, I get a ride home, and then I realize I've got like glass in my body, I'm not like overly damaged, and my wife is like, you are an idiot. So then I've got to figure out, like, God, what do I do in this situation? And so I had met a dentist. That's like one of the first guys I'd met. So I'm like, I don't know any doctors, I don't have health insurance yet. So I call my dentist. I'm like, hey, can you like Novocaine me and get this glass out of me? And he's like, dude, that actually sounds sort of exciting. And so that's all, right? You work with what you got. So I'm in the dentist's office and he's Novocaining me up and pulling the glass out. and story after story of like, we never want to live that pace again. But God had planted something that we knew we were supposed to be there. And I just started grinding in the city. I wanted to know where the correctional facilities were, where the streets were. I wanted to know where the homeless populations were. But I also wanted to know our mayor and our police chief and our public safety director. I wanted to know people in places of leadership. And what I found is the church really was not influential in our city. But yet our city was facing dramatic needs and going through crisis. And so I wanted to reconcile that. And the leadership team heard me talk yesterday about impact and influence. And my prayer was, God, allow me to have such an impact on our city that it then gains me influence with those that are leading our city. And it took a while to build that out, but fast forward by 2019, almost 13 years into the journey, we now were mobilizing almost 20,000 volunteers a year to reach our city. Those kind of numbers produce results that the city begins to take notice. Majority of them being faith-based groups, churches locally, and churches like you guys that come out and serve. And so we started making such a difference that they were taking notice. And then we were taking on projects, and we were mobilizing, and all of a sudden I found myself meeting with our police chief and with our mayor and with the owner of the Rockies and people that had significant influence in our city. And I tell people this all the time, like, it's amazing what the church can do when we're faithful to give, right? Our 10% comes in and above and beyond that, but how many know we pay a pretty hefty price to Uncle Sam as well? And as concerned as I am about where my 10% goes in house use, I'm pretty concerned about where my 30% goes as well. And so I felt like, all right, like I want the church to be mobilized, but I also want to make a difference in this piece. And so again, we worked hard to bring all these things together to where when 2020 hit, and all of a sudden everything shut down. Crisis creates opportunities. And in this midst of what's an unknown pandemic, everything shut down, we're finding that our city is desperate for a place of hope and healing. So we're now working to mobilize. What does that look like? Everything shut down March 14th in Colorado. And so we get to Easter weekend, which was April 12th. On that Saturday, April 11th, we worked with, again, through partnerships, Impact Creates Influence. We're working with our emergency operations department, and we created space to where we went out on that Saturday before Easter Sunday. We built 1,200 Hope boxes. Remember panic buying water and toilet paper? The only reason you're buying it because someone else is, and because they're buying it, you're buying it, you don't even know why. But that's the season we're living in, but it created panic and fear. And so we built these Hope boxes with some basic necessities, some water, toilet paper, and then some resources. And our team mobilized and we started knocking on doors in the neighborhoods. And people would come to the door and we'd step back our 6 to 8 feet. And of course, we're taking gang members and formerly incarcerated men as our team. And this is back before masks were cool. So we're like wearing bandanas, look like we're robbing the neighborhoods. But we're dropping off these boxes and people would come and they would literally come to the door and we would say, hey, we're hope dealers. We just want to make sure you're good. Here's some resources. And we would just see tears. And they would tell us, man, no one's checked on us. We don't know what's going on, and we don't know what to do. And we're like, you know what, we're coming back. And we started building relationships and inroads, and that led to where we started raising money to keep local restaurants in Denver employed because they were struggling to stay open. So we would pay their bills for all of their employees and operations so they could make the food. Then we'd take that food, and half of it we'd go serve our first responders, and we're on the front line, and half of it we'd go into the neighborhoods. And we saw that build and grow to the point where the city got a call from Borden Farms out of Texas. And they've got milk, and they're trying to figure out how to get milk to major cities. And again, out of this relationship, the city calls me, and I'm the guy that always says yes. And so they're like, hey, we have milk. Borden Farms, can you figure it out? I'm like, absolutely, I got you. And then my team, they ask the logistical questions, right? They're the planners, and they're like, well, how much milk is it? And it happened to be 4,000 gallons of milk every Friday. So now we're like, that's an amazing opportunity with an overwhelming need. How are we going to refrigerate it? What's it look like? So now we're figuring out that process, right? And so we're calling different places. Long story short, because we, again, Impact Creates Influence, I'm able to call Kroenke Sports, who own and run the Denver Nuggets, world champs. Let's give it up for some Nugget fans. We happened to be there at the last game when they won the championship, and it was amazing. We tried to go downtown. Again, I've got 3 teenage boys. So we're down there. We lasted a few minutes, and it got a little crazy. But through our partnership with Kroenke, we're like, hey, I need this is during COVID, so the NBA was in the bubble in Orlando. The Avalanche, who they own, were playing in Canada. So I'm like, here's a resource. It's all kingdom anyway. So we need your refrigerators. We need your space. And they say yes. So we start moving milk into the Pepsi Center to get milk out to our city, which then led to, in June, we get a call about the CARES Act, Farmers to Family. Again, you got farmers that are producing milk and meat and produce. But there's no schools, there's no restaurants, there's no big games. And so now we say yes to that, which became every Friday morning, we called it Food Friday. We're getting 200,000 pounds of food delivered to Ball Arena. And now we're mobilizing, and I'm employing gang members to be forklift drivers and food distributors. And before we know it, we've got 600, 700, 800 cars every Friday coming through the parking lot to feed our city. We thought it would be a month or two, and it went actually for a full year. We got 3.8 million pounds of food out, and we fed almost 700,000 people in our city. And I share that story because it started with this dream inside of us that my wife and I prayed. We said, we know what we feel like we're supposed to be in Denver. We didn't know what it was going to look like. We know the journey or the length that it was going to take to get there. And we said yes. And what we couldn't see became visible as we stayed faithful to the process, to where now we look back and 700,000 people got food because we said yes 16 years before that to an opportunity to be in a place where God was going to use us. And so we're thankful that you guys come out and connect. And to Pastor Jason, if you need a trip to Denver, man, plan early. We're going to try to work in a Rockies game next year, but it's fun. It is an experience, and really it's so mutually beneficial. You help us serve more people than we can by ourselves, but I promise you, you leave being refreshed as much as the person that you're helping. And so what I love is I get to wrap up your series, Dream On. And how fitting is that is sort of my life, is living in this state of what is the next dream and the opportunity. And where we're at now influenced. We now have almost about 20,000 volunteers, and we serve over 50,000 people in the city. As crazy as it is, I mean, anybody seen Christmas stuff in the stores yet? Like we're like barely end of August, right? And all of a sudden you're like, it gets early and early and earlier. But we have to plan the same way, to the point that our Christmas, we serve 10,000 kids in the city of Denver. And it's gotten so big that we actually have taken over Coors Field, where the Rockies play, and that's where we host our Denver Dream Center Christmas outreach. We'll have 12,000 people roll through, from volunteers to people, and now it's the city calling us, saying, how can we serve with what you do? You hear what I'm saying? The city's calling us as a faith-based organization, saying, how can we serve with you guys? How can we plug our resources into what you do? Again, being faithful, God positions you to where not only the impact you get, but it also creates influence. And there's a story that I love in 1 Kings chapter 18. Let me read you a couple verses. In verse 41, it says, Elijah said to Ahab, go eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain. Everybody say sound. The sound of heavy rain. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel. He bent down to the ground, put his face between his knees. And he said, go and look toward this sea, he told his servant. And he went up and he looked. There's nothing there, he said. 7 times Elijah said, go back. And the 7th time the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. So Elijah says, go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds. The wind rose, a heavy rain came on, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. Listen, you've been talking about Dream On. You've talked about courage to dream, living the dream. And today, I want to talk to you about the destiny of a dream. Because the reality is, every one of us in here, from the oldest to the youngest, God has planted, Ecclesiastes says that God has placed eternity in the hearts of men, meaning there is something bigger inside of us than we can realize and recognize. Right? Some of you, anybody really good at daydreaming back in school? That was me. Right? Like, I have the attention span of about 13 seconds. I'm sure I would have been on multiple medications as a kid. But I was pre that, so I just survived with like a crazy imagination, and I loved to daydream, right? You're looking out the window, and anything is a possibility to become a reality. And God's placed eternity within us, which means there is something so big and so significant within us. But sometimes things happen in life, and we don't share that with somebody, or we sit on it, or we just get busy, or we get married and we take on debt, and it's our house, and things begin to move. Anybody ever feel like that? But if you just step back and you really think, like, am I where I ever thought I would be? Am I living the dream that when I was 11 or 13 or 18 or 25 or 40, whatever age or stage of life, that there's something within you? And how do we chase that dream? What is the destiny of our dream? And honestly, part of it is just overcoming some obstacles that oftentimes stand in our way. I love the story of Elijah because a few chapters earlier, we don't know a whole lot about Elijah. There's really nothing said about this prophet, this man of God. And then he comes on the scene. There's an evil king, Ahab, and his wife Jezebel, who you've probably heard that name. There's a reason we don't name our daughters Jezebel, because she was very evil, right? And so you don't have like, oh, the little Jezebel. But you read the story, and they're leading, and it's very wicked. And so Elijah out of nowhere comes on the scene, and he tells them, hey, no more rain, no more dew, and he disappears. Very interesting moment to start his career. And now he's on the run. But this drought and this famine hit the nation. And he's by a brook, and God feeds him, and he's got things that he moves through. And finally Obadiah comes to him and says, hey, it's time to come back, and the king needs an answer. It's time for a response. And you might know the story in the first part of 18. Elijah says, you know what, enough is enough. Call the prophets of Baal, and we're going to meet on top of Mount Carmel. And he says, whoever's got answers by fire, that's the God that we're going to serve. And there's a significant moment that happens here. When you read this story, remember, the prophets of Baal is like, hey, you guys go first. And it's like this, man versus man competition. Like, all right, you guys have first dibs. And so the prophets of Baal get up there, and they're screaming and shouting and dancing, and they're loud, and they're cutting themselves. And I love it because Elijah's like the original smack talker in Bible's like, hey, maybe he can't hear you, yell a little louder, right? He's like, right? And then he's like, well, maybe he's going to the bathroom. I mean, literally, he's just on the sideline. And finally, it's their turn to stop. If you remember the story, before Elijah prays, he does this. He grabs 12 stones. And remember what he does? He rebuilds the altar. And here's what's significant, because up to that point, right, God had called a nation to be his people. Things had set in, and motions had happened. The nation had split. 10 went this way, 2 go this way, and now the nation's divided. And again, if I had more time, there's so much insight to think about where we are as a country and as a community. We wonder why we have so many shootings and issues. And listen, I can tell you about our city, our homeless camps, the fentanyl. We lost 2 people just last week, one of my best friends. We've been working in the city for like 13 years together, and he's a huge community advocate and against violence, and his 23-year-old son, 3 blocks from our building, was shot and killed. And so now I'm heading back so that we can try to get his other son who's in prison a moment to see his brother that's now about to be buried. We had another guy that we've been working with that sat in my office just weeks ago and died from fentanyl on Sunday. And we look and wonder, why is there so much evil in our country? Because our country is so divided. The devil knows that God set us in motion. Here's God's plan. And if he can divide that plan, if he can get us divided by colors, by demographics, by backgrounds, by vaccines, by politics, whatever it is, then we're going to struggle. And so here's what Elijah does. He pulls the people together, and he knows that he needs to pray this powerful prayer. We need a miracle from God to happen. So what does he do? He rebuilds the altar. He takes 12 stones, because where there's unity, there's power. And he builds that. He puts the altar together, and then he prays, and God answers that prayer. Powerful moment. They kill the prophets of Baal. But now we get down to these verses, and here's Elijah. He's looking out there, and he's now after almost 3.5 years of drought. And he says to his young aide, well, first he says to Ahab, right? Ahab's there, and Ahab's like, uh-oh. Like, those were Jezebel's prophets. She ain't going to be happy. And it hasn't rained for 3.5 years, and they're ready for a miracle. And he tells Ahab, he says, here, you better hitch up your chariots and get out of here, because what does he say? I hear the sound of rain. Oftentimes, we will hear something before we see something, meaning that's why we come into worship. That's why you've got to be a person of prayer. That's why you've got to be in God's Word, because he will speak something to you that maybe is deep in your spirit, maybe is in your family or in your marriage or your business, that you hear it before you see it. So Elijah says, hitch up your chariot, get out of here before the rain stops you. Ahab's got to be like, what are you talking about? It hasn't rained in 3 years, bro. There's not even a cloud in the sky. And Ahab's like, I don't know what you're saying. And Elijah's like, get out of here, it's coming. Then he takes his aide, his servant, he goes to the top of Mount Carmel. And what does Elijah do? He gets down. he puts his head and he just begins to pray. In that moment, in that posture of humility, and then he tells his servant, he says, hey, run up to the top and tell me what you see. So he runs up there, he comes back, and what does he say? I see nothing. The first obstacle that you got to overcome in this process of the destiny of your dream is invisibility. So you are looking, and what do you do when what you see doesn't line up with what God says? Remember when Joshua takes over as commander of Israel? Moses is now gone. They're about to fight Jericho. You get to Joshua chapter 6, and God says, listen, see, I have given you the victory. Joshua looks up, and what does he see? He sees this fortified city of Jericho that's tightly shut. Their military's ready, and God says, see, I've given you the victory. And Joshua's like, I see a serious battle ahead of me. But God says, see, I've given you a victory. So you and I fight from a place of victory, not for victory. When Jesus died on the cross, what did he say? It is finished, it's done. And so sometimes we have to see what's not even in existence. And I know it's sort of crazy, but isn't that what faith is all about? Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things that are not seen. You and I live in a space and a place that the world around us can't imagine. So that dream that God's placed within you, some of you, you're sitting on something. You've not shared it with anybody because as you pray and you know that God's saying something in your marriage, in your business, where you want to serve or give, there's a risk to that dream. And you're sitting on it because when you look, it's like this man that runs up is like, what do you see? Nothing. He says, go back. So he runs back up the hill, runs back down. Hey, what do you see? Nothing. Third time, fourth time, fifth time, sixth time. How many of you know if you're the runner, you'd be like, seriously, Elijah, like, I was just there. Can you send somebody else? And he's like, one more time. God, listen, some of you, you're in this position right now that you're one more time away. It's the business that God is, I mean, driving around with Pastor Jason, this guy has dreams and visions that you guys, I don't even know if you know the full extent of what can happen through this community of faith. And the dreams that are within your pastor, but have to be within you. That you got to believe that even though you've gone 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times and now you're feeling tired, I don't want to run again. Now he goes the 7th time. And what was invisible, he comes back and now he says, what do you see? And he says, I see a cloud. But what? It's the size of a man's hand. So not only, sometimes we have to overcome invisibility, but we have to overcome insignificance. Because sometimes we see, and listen, like, I could tell you a million more stories and show you pictures of places and people that I get to be with, that there is no reason. We laugh because I'm from a small town and I got a degree from Central Bible College that doesn't even exist. So where God has placed me does not make sense. But if you would have told me, hey, start the process 16 years ago, give yourself 10 years of this, and after 15 years I would have said, I'm too impatient, no way. But what seemed invisible doesn't always just break crazy. Sometimes it seems insignificant. Listen, but it's something. Book of Zechariah says, don't despise what? The day of small beginnings. Anybody got kids? Remember when they're born and they're just this little something, right? I didn't know what to do. They're like, here's your son. I'm like, hey, like, I don't want to drop this thing, right? And it's dreams. Some of you have grown up around farms, and you know there's a time that you plant. And does it grow the next day and produce? Sometimes it's weeks or even months that something is underneath the ground that you can't even see. But guess what? It's working. And that's why you tend to it and you're faithful with it because it's working. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know it's there. And all of a sudden, like, this little bitty sprout. And you're like, oh, there it is. But then it begins to grow. And multiple things begin to grow. And this harvest that's prepared. And so he says, go one more time. He comes back. It's the cloud as small as a man's hand. You got to overcome invisibility. Some of you, you've not shared what God is stirring in you. You feel like it's not even being seen. I don't know if anything's going to happen. Some of you, you're stuck because you feel like it's insignificant. what I can give and how I can serve, how I speak, what I've got in my background or my availability, it seems insignificant, so we don't step up and give because we don't feel like it's even worth it. But Elijah says, it's time to go because it's coming. And again, what I love about being here for this weekend is I believe that there's so much more for this community church, for Grain Valley, not only Grain Valley, but this area, doing a night of worship tonight. Listen, you've got a pastor that's leading you there, but it's time to release your dreams. It's time to figure out and begin to pray. And even if you don't see it, you got to begin to believe it. And even though it's invisible, it's coming. Keep going back. Keep going back. It's marching around a Jericho wall that did not make sense. 4 times, 5 times, don't stop on 6. Because the 7th time when it says it's time to praise and worship, the walls came down and the miracle happened. Some of you, you're so close. And what may seem insignificant, what it does though, is in that moment, I love it, because it produces the impossibilities. Elijah, I love the end of that because we were sharing stories last night. Back in the day, we used to actually be able to run pretty good and like pretty fast. And something happens to Elijah that when he sees what was even the size of a man's hand, he gets excited. And he's like, dude, it's time to go. It hasn't rained for 3 years, but now the rain is coming. They don't see it. It's clouds the size of a man's hand, but it's coming. And in that belief moment, the Spirit comes on Elijah. What does he do? He tucks his cloak in his belt, and that dude takes off. The chariots and the horses are going, and you can just, right? Like somehow, and it's not like a short run. It's 17 miles back. That dude outran the chariots and the horses. Can you imagine? And my prayer for you as Grain Valley, get ahead of it. Get ahead of what the city's trying to do. Right? We're not waiting on, no offense, you're on the school board, but we're not waiting for school boards, politicians. We're not waiting for the government to tell us what we can and cannot do. We believe that there is a God that created the universe, that He's in control. Miracles still happen. You need to believe that your marriage is going to make it. You got to believe that your finances are going to make it. Your kids can love Jesus and they can stand in the gaps for those that are hurting and lost. The church can make it. And so we pray and we believe in a way that we move in a direction that when, oh, it's coming, let's go. Right? And you just take off and the anointing is on you and you are running in this miraculous moment because God is a God of the impossibilities. You overcome what's invisible. You don't get distracted by feeling insignificant, but every day you wake up. One of my favorite verses, Psalm chapter 5, verse 3. David says, early in the morning, I get up and I lay my request before you, and then I wait in anticipation. For me, it's like every morning, it's like Christmas with Jesus. I don't know what He's got for me today, but I believe that it's going to be huge. I believe a life's going to be changed, and I get to be a part of it. So I wake up in the morning, and I get my coffee, I get my Bible, I'm like, all right, God, what are we doing today? Because I know it's going to be amazing. See, here's how I've purposed to live my life as we wrap up. There was a study done a long time ago, and it talked about the regret of action and inaction. That most of us, when we live day to day, we regret things that we do. Meaning, like, I probably shouldn't have eaten it at Big Biscuit for breakfast. I shouldn't have gone there, done that, said that. We think of things that we're doing that we sort of regret. We should have said that. But if you get to somebody that's in their later stages of life, and you ask them about regrets in their life, what they won't tell you is what they regret doing. They tell you the regrets of what they didn't do. I wish I would have traveled more. I wish I would have told that person that I loved them. I wish I would have. And like 90% of people at the end of their life, they regret what they didn't do, not what they did do. And as a church, as a husband, a wife, a dad, a mom, as a student, my challenge is dream on. Live it, believe it, the destiny of a dream. That you try something. Take that dream that God's given you and move forward so that God can do miracles in you and through you. Listen, I believe you're about to celebrate 7 years. God's perfect number is 7. I believe you're about to hit a season. The rain's coming. Move forward. Chase after it. Let me pray.